On a weekday morning in the autumn of 1947, a man in his 40s stood in a crowded railway carriage on the line from Odawara into Tokyo. He made the journey 3 times a week. He was going to work. 7 days earlier, he had been an Imperial Prince of Japan. His name had been Kanin Haruhito. It was now Kanin Sumihito, and he was the president of a small firm in Tokyo that made building fittings for the American occupation forces. A cartoonist came to interview him that November. The joke going round Tokyo was that princes ate with golden chopsticks and could not go to the lavatory without an attendant. Sumihito laughed and told him it was not like that. He said his wife had gone out to buy croquettes at the local delicatessen and had come home without them because they cost too much. That is what an Imperial Prince of Japan was 6 weeks after the 14th of October, 1947. On that day, 51 people were struck off the Imperial Register. They belonged to 11 branches of the Imperial family. 26 of the men among them had woken up with a right of succession to the throne of Japan and went to bed without one. Among the 51, there was a field marshal of the Imperial Japanese Army, a former Prime Minister of Japan, an Olympic horseman, and a boy of 15. By the following week, they were a pensioner under investigation, a shopkeeper, a bankrupt, and a schoolboy whose family had to start selling the furniture. Nobody was arrested for it, nobody was exiled, nobody was shot at. They were simply told to go and earn a living. This is what happened to Japan's imperial princes after the war. The decision had been taken the week before, at the first meeting ever held of the Imperial House Council. In the chair was Katayama Tetsu, the Prime Minister, and he explained the arithmetic to them. The 11 branches all descended from an emperor called Go Fushimi, who came to the throne in 1298. In the male line, they now stood more than 40 generations away from the reigning emperor. The real reason was money, and it had been written into the new constitution. Article 88 said that all property of the imperial household belonged to the state. The imperial family had just lost the forests, the farmland, and the securities that had paid for it. There was nothing left to keep 11 branches on. The Americans had a second reason. The occupation had decided to keep the emperor as a constitutional monarch and a symbol of the country. It had not decided to keep the aristocracy standing behind him. A large imperial family meant permanent pressure to find its members something important to do, and the simplest way to remove that pressure was to remove the members. So 3 houses survived, all of them belonging to the emperor's own brothers. 11 did not. A few days after the council met, the emperor gave a dinner for the people he had just removed. He told them that nothing between them had changed and that he hoped they would go on speaking freely with him whenever the chance came. Then they went home to work out what they were going to sell. One of those families owned a summer house in the mountains at Karuizawa. Remember it. 40 of the 51 were given a payment on the way out. The head of a household received 2.1 million yen, and the other men received about 1.5 million each. The whole bill came to 47.5 million yen. 11 of the 51 were given nothing at all. Those were the ones with military careers, and the occupation would not pay them a penny. The day after they became ordinary citizens, they were purged from public office as well. Then whatever they had kept was taxed. A capital levy took between 40 and 90% of these families' holdings, depending on the family. The most senior of the 11 who got nothing was Higashikuni Naruhiko. 2 years earlier, Higashikuni had been the Prime Minister of Japan. He was appointed 2 days after the surrender. He is the only member of the imperial family ever to head a cabinet. The hope behind the appointment was that a prince at the top could hold a beaten country together. He presided over the signing of the surrender on the 2nd of September 1945. He resigned 54 days later, and he is still the shortest-serving prime minister in Japanese history. In 1946, he asked the emperor for permission to give up his imperial status. The emperor refused him. In 1947, it was taken off him anyway. So he went into trade. He opened a provisions store, and it failed. He opened a shop selling second-hand goods, and that failed. He opened a dressmaker's, then a tea house, then a café in the black market at Shinjuku, and he sold the family's antiques to keep going. Every one of them failed. Prince Nashimoto Morimasa was 71 years old when the Americans came for him. Nashimoto was a field marshal of the Imperial Japanese Army, and he had been chief priest of the Grand Shrine at Ise since 1937. On the 2nd of December 1945, General MacArthur ordered his arrest as a Class A war crime suspect. The reason was essentially his position at the head of state Shinto. He is the only member of the Japanese imperial family who has ever been arrested for war crimes. They took him to Sugamo prison in Tokyo. When the charge was announced, a newspaper report quoted his own description of himself. He was, he said, a field marshal without a command, a prince without influence, and a Shinto ritualist with very little to do. He added that he had no idea why he was to be tried. The arrest frightened Japan because of what it implied. If a prince could be taken, then the emperor could be taken. That was rather the point of it. Almost nobody on either side believed Nashimoto was a serious defendant. He was a hostage held against the emperor's cooperation with the reforms the Americans wanted. He was released without charge on the 13th of April, 1946, after 4 months inside. 18 months later, he lost his title along with everybody else. He had been the second most senior man in the entire imperial family during the war. He died in January 1951. The newspapers had a nickname for him, taken from his photographs. They called him the Moustache Prince. Prince Asaka Yasuhiko had the finest house of any of them, and it is still standing today. It is an Art Deco mansion at Shirokanedai in Tokyo, built for Asaka after he came home from France. The state took it off him. You can walk round it this afternoon if you happen to be in Tokyo, because it is now the Teien Art Museum. Most of the people who go there for the exhibitions have no idea whose house they are standing in. He is the hardest man in this story. In December 1937, he commanded the Japanese army at Nanjing. In May 1946, the occupation authorities interrogated him about what had happened there. He was never brought to trial because MacArthur had granted the imperial family immunity from prosecution. That is the documented record, and it is where this episode leaves it. In October 1947, he lost his status and he was purged from public office along with his son because both of them had been officers. He moved down to Atami on the coast south of Tokyo, and he lived another 34 years. In December 1951, he was received into the Catholic Church. He is the first member of the Japanese imperial clan known to have converted. And he played golf. He played an enormous amount of golf, and then he began building courses to play it on. He was one of the 2 designers of the plateau course at the Dai Hakone Country Club, which opened in 1954 and takes bookings today. Asaka died at Atami in 1981 at the age of 93. Takeda Tsuneyoshi had ridden for Japan at the Berlin Olympics of 1936, and the newspapers had called him the sports prince ever since. He was an army colonel by the end of the war. When he became a commoner, he tried business, exactly as Higashikuni had, and the company he set up to make knitting machines went bankrupt. So he went back to sport, and this is where the story turns. In 1948, he became president of the Japan Skating Federation and took the National Equestrian Federation as well. In 1962, he was made president of the Japanese Olympic Committee, and he served as a vice president of the organizing committee for the Tokyo Olympics of 1964. Consider what that means. The Games of 1964 were the moment Japan told the world it had come back, 19 years after the surrender. One of the men running them had been stripped of his title by that same occupation. He joined the International Olympic Committee in 1967. He died in 1992. That is the pattern underneath all of this. The title went. The name, the schooling, and the address book did not go, and for some of these families, that turned out to be enough. It was not enough for all of them. Shigeko, the emperor's own eldest daughter, had married into the Higashikuni branch in 1943, and she went out of the imperial family alongside her husband. What was reported of her afterwards was that she took in piecework and queued at the local sales. She said publicly that the hard years had let her find ordinary human happiness for the first time. She died of cancer at 35, leaving 5 children. Her parents went to the funeral. Custom said an emperor and empress of Japan did not attend the funeral of a commoner. They went anyway. Fushimi Hiroaki was 15 years old in October 1947, and he wrote his account of it 75 years later at the age of 90. That account is the plainest we have. The tax was huge and unprecedented, he said. The one-off payment was decided for them without anybody asking them, and it soon disappeared. So, he wrote, the former imperial family members had to sell in order to live. He named where the land went. His own branch's ground in Tokyo became the Hotel New Otami. The Takeda family's ground became the Grand Prince Hotel at Takanawa. Some branches had been living on land that belonged to the imperial household ministry rather than to themselves, so they had nothing they were allowed to sell. Fushimi says the Kaya branch really struggled. Others lost what was left of it through simple inexperience in business, or were cheated out of it by people who saw them coming. The man doing much of the buying was Yasujiro Tsutsumi, who controlled the Seibu Railway. His nickname in business was Pistol. He bought aristocratic land cheaply, all through the years when the tax was forcing the sales, and he put hotels up on it. Now go back to that summer house in the mountains at Karuizawa. It belonged to the Asaka family. Tsutsumi bought it in 1947, remodeled it, and opened it as a hotel, and he needed a name to put on the front. He called it the Prince Hotel. Seibu's own company history records what happened after that, and it is the detail that says everything. Once Karuizawa was open, the families who had left the imperial house began approaching him themselves. Higashikuni Naruhiko outlived every part of it. The failed shopkeeper, the 54-day prime minister, the man the emperor would not release in 1946, died on the 20th of January 1990. He was 102 years old. He had outlived his wife, 2 of his sons, all of his brothers and sisters, and his nephew, the emperor. At his death, he held 3 records at once. He was the longest-lived prime minister Japan has ever had, and the longest-lived member of the imperial family on record. He was also the oldest living former head of government anywhere in the world. Now here is the last part of it, and it happened 3 weeks ago. Japan's imperial family has run out of heirs. The throne passes only to a man descended from an emperor in the male line. By this summer, there were 16 people left in the family, and very few of them qualified. On the 17th of July, 2026, the Diet passed a revision of the Imperial House law. It is the first substantial change to that law since it was written in 1947. It allows the imperial family to adopt unmarried men aged 15 and over who descend in the male line from the 11 branches removed in 1947. The men adopted would not gain a right to the throne themselves. Their sons would. 79 years after Japan decided it could not afford 11 branches of its imperial family, it has passed a law asking their grandsons to come back. And the hotels are still called the Prince.